Lexington emerged in the late 18th century as a frontier settlement in the Kentucky District of Virginia, shaped by fertile bluegrass soils, river access, and contested land claims following American Revolutionary War migration patterns and settler agricultural expansion pressures. Early cabins clustered along natural clearings, while surveyors imposed grids that reflected Virginia legal traditions, distributing parcels to speculators and veterans, embedding patterns of ownership that would influence Lexington's growth, inequality, and civic organization for decades to come. Located within the inner bluegrass region, Lexington benefited from limestone-rich soils that supported pasture and hemp cultivation, while proximity to tributaries of the Kentucky River connected farms to downstream markets, enabling gradual integration into broader Atlantic economic networks regional. Between 1780 and statehood in 1792, settlers established churches, courts, and taverns, institutions that stabilized community life while also reinforcing social hierarchies tied to landholding, slavery, and gendered labor divisions characteristic of the Trans-Appalachian frontier during formative settlement phase. The town's early economy relied on subsistence mixed with market-oriented hemp production, processed into rope and bagging, which found demand along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, linking Lexington's hinterland to plantation economies farther south and west during this period. Enslaved laborers were integral to this system, working fields and processing facilities, their forced labor underpinning wealth accumulation for a small class of landowners, embedding racialized inequality into the social fabric that would persist throughout the early 19th century. Political authority shifted after Kentucky achieved statehood, with Lexington emerging as a regional administrative center where county courts, militia organization, and electoral practices translated frontier autonomy into more formalized governance structures aligned with emerging state institutions of era. Education developed early, most notably through the founding of Transylvania Seminary, later Transylvania University, which attracted students from across the frontier, contributing to Lexington's reputation as a center of learning and professional training in law, medicine, and theology fields. Road improvements and turnpikes enhanced overland connections to eastern markets, reducing isolation and allowing merchants to import manufactured goods while exporting agricultural products, gradually shifting Lexington from a purely frontier settlement toward a more diversified regional commercial hub. Taverns and public squares functioned as centers of exchange where information, credit arrangements, and political discussion circulated, fostering a participatory public culture among white male citizens while excluding women, enslaved people, and many poorer residents from formal decision-making processes. Religious denominations expanded, including Presbyterians, Baptists, and Methodists, each establishing congregations that structured moral life and community discipline, reinforcing norms of behavior while also providing networks of support that extended across scattered rural populations surrounding Lexington during expansion. By the early 19th century, Lexington's population growth reflected both natural increase and continued migration, bringing artisans, professionals, and merchants who diversified the local economy and contributed to the emergence of a stratified but interconnected urban society structure. Local newspapers began to circulate, transmitting political ideas, commercial advertisements, and notices, integrating Lexington into wider communication networks that linked the interior to coastal cities, shaping public opinion and reinforcing shared identities among literate inhabitants during this period continued. Legal frameworks governing property, inheritance, and contracts became more standardized, reducing uncertainty and facilitating investment, yet these same systems entrenched inequalities by protecting slaveholding interests and limiting opportunities for those without capital or legal standing within the local economy. Markets and fairs drew rural producers into town, creating periodic surges of exchange that connected hinterland farms with urban merchants, reinforcing Lexington's role as an intermediary node within regional trade circuits extending across Kentucky and into neighboring states. Healthcare practices evolved with the presence of trained physicians associated with Transylvania, who applied contemporary medical knowledge while also contending with limited resources, epidemics, and the challenges of treating dispersed populations across a largely rural landscape during this period. Social life reflected both refinement and frontier conditions, with assemblies, horse races, and public events coexisting alongside labor demands and environmental constraints, illustrating a community negotiating identity between established Eastern norms and Western realities during the decades of settlement. Slavery's presence shaped household structures and labor allocation, with enslaved individuals performing domestic and agricultural work, their lives constrained by legal codes and surveillance, contributing to an economy dependent on coercion and a society marked by persistent inequality. Transportation limitations continued to affect trade, as seasonal conditions influenced river navigation and road quality, requiring merchants to adapt timing and storage strategies, highlighting the ongoing interplay between geography and economic activity in Lexington's development during this early period. By 1830, Lexington had transitioned from a frontier outpost into a recognized regional center, its institutions, economy, and social structures reflecting decades of adaptation, conflict, and growth within the specific environmental and political context of Central Kentucky region. The patterns established during this period, including land distribution, reliance on enslaved labor, and investment in education and infrastructure, created enduring frameworks that would influence Lexington's trajectory beyond 1830, shaping its role within Kentucky and the broader United States. These developments illustrate how a specific place, bounded by geography and historical circumstance, can generate complex systems of economy, governance, and culture, demonstrating the cumulative effects of early decisions on long-term regional structure and identity in the Bluegrass region. During the early 19th century, Lexington consolidated its role as a regional center, with expanding commercial activity and institutional development reflecting the maturation of a society transitioning from frontier conditions toward a more structured and interconnected urban environment. Merchants increasingly coordinated trade through established networks, importing finished goods while exporting hemp, livestock, and agricultural products, creating a circulation of capital that tied Lexington more closely to national markets and reduced its earlier economic isolation. Hemp remains central to the local economy, processed into rope and bagging materials essential for agricultural transport, and its production relied heavily on enslaved labor, reinforcing systems of coercion that underpinned profitability and sustained elite wealth accumulation. Artisans and craftsmen, including blacksmiths, carpenters, and coopers, contributed to a diversified economic base, supporting both rural and urban needs, while their presence indicated a gradual shift from purely agrarian dependence toward a mixed economic structure. Lexington's geographic position within the Bluegrass region continued to shape its development, as fertile soils and accessible waterways supported agricultural productivity, while road improvements linked the town to surrounding counties and facilitated more consistent commercial exchange. Turnpike construction expanded in the 1810s and 1820s, improving reliability of transport and enabling faster movement of goods and people, reducing travel times and strengthening Lexington's role as a hub connecting interior settlements with larger distribution routes. Financial institutions began to emerge, including local banks that provided credit to merchants and landowners, although access remained limited, reinforcing disparities between established elites and smaller farmers or laborers with fewer economic resources available. Public buildings, including courthouses and meeting halls, became more prominent within the town's landscape, symbolizing the consolidation of civic authority and providing spaces for governance, legal proceedings, and community gatherings that structured public life. Educational institutions expanded their influence, with Transylvania University continuing to attract students and faculty, contributing to intellectual activity and professional training that distinguished Lexington from smaller surrounding settlements during this period of regional development. Medical education and practice advanced alongside the university, positioning Lexington as an early center for medical instruction in the Western Territories, although treatments remained limited by contemporary knowledge and the challenges of disease in growing communities. The presence of enslaved individuals remained pervasive, with labor extending across agricultural, domestic, and industrial settings, their constrained lives forming an essential yet marginalized component of Lexington's economic and social systems during these decades. Free black residents also lived within Lexington, navigating restrictive laws and social barriers, forming small communities and participating in limited economic activities, while facing constant legal and social pressures that constrained mobility and opportunity. Political life became more organized, with local leaders participating in state-level debates over banking, infrastructure, and internal improvements, reflecting broader national discussions while maintaining focus on regional priorities tied to economic growth. Elections and public discourse were dominated by property-owning white men, whose interests shaped policy outcomes, reinforcing exclusionary practices that limited broader participation and maintained existing hierarchies within Lexington's political structure. Religious institutions continued to expand, influencing moral expectations and community cohesion, while also participating in educational efforts and charitable activities that addressed some social needs within the growing population of the town. Population growth brought increased demand for housing and services, leading to more defined neighborhoods and a clearer urban layout, although disparities in living conditions reflected broader social and economic inequalities present within Lexington society. Market days remained central to economic life, drawing rural producers into town and facilitating exchanges that connected local agriculture with urban consumption, reinforcing Lexington's intermediary role between countryside and wider trade networks. Communication networks improved with more regular postal services, allowing information, newspapers, and correspondence to circulate more efficiently, strengthening connections between Lexington and distant cities and contributing to shared political and cultural awareness. Legal practices became more formalized, with courts handling increasing numbers of cases related to property, debt, and contracts, reflecting a more complex economy and the need for structured mechanisms to resolve disputes and enforce agreements. Despite growth, limitations persisted, including vulnerability to economic fluctuations, transportation challenges, and reliance on enslaved labor, which created underlying tensions that would shape Lexington's future trajectory and social dynamics. By the late 1820s, Lexington exhibited characteristics of a stable regional center, with established institutions, diversified economic activity, and a structured social order, marking a clear departure from its earlier frontier identity while retaining foundational patterns. The developments of this period reinforced long-term structural dynamics, including economic dependence on agriculture and slavery, institutional investment in education, and evolving governance systems, all of which would continue to influence Lexington's position within Kentucky beyond 1830. As Lexington entered the 1820s, its identity as a regional center became more defined, with established institutions, economic specialization, and social hierarchies reflecting decades of gradual development within the Bluegrass region's agricultural and commercial framework. Agricultural production remained the foundation of local prosperity, particularly hemp and livestock, with surrounding farms supplying raw materials that sustained Lexington's processing activities, reinforcing a system in which rural labor and urban markets operated in continuous interdependence. Hemp processing facilities operated near town, converting harvested crops into usable goods, and this activity required coordinated labor, transportation, and storage, illustrating the increasingly organized nature of Lexington's economy during this later phase of early development. Enslaved labor continued to underpin these operations, with individuals assigned to both fieldwork and industrial tasks, their labor structured through systems of control that maximized output while denying autonomy, reinforcing deeply embedded social inequalities within the community. Commercial districts expanded modestly, with shops, warehouses, and offices clustering along main streets, creating a recognizable urban core where trade, finance, and services converged, marking Lexington's transition from dispersed settlement to organized town environment. Merchants developed more stable relationships with suppliers and buyers, often extending credit and relying on reputation, forming networks of trust and obligation that structured economic exchange and allowed business activity to function despite limited formal financial systems. Banking institutions played a cautious but growing role, offering loans and facilitating transactions, although economic instability and limited regulation sometimes produced uncertainty, highlighting the evolving nature of financial practices in early 19th century Kentucky towns. Lexington's geographic advantages continued to influence its trajectory, as fertile land and proximity to river systems supported sustained agricultural output, while improved roads strengthened connections with surrounding counties and regional markets beyond central Kentucky.